Welcome, everyone. Again, day one at AWE, so exciting, so much good energy here. I'm finally starting to recognize people. This is my third year here. Very excited about today's session. I am your track chair. My name is Sarah Porter. I am the Director of Innovative Philanthropy for the nonprofit Hope for Haiti. I think we are one of very few nonprofits here. We focus on poverty alleviation in the south of Haiti through education, healthcare, clean water, and economic development. And I, a couple years ago, said, why are we not using this amazing VR technology? And our team was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, hold on, guys. So we were able to partner with the VR studio to recreate one of our partner schools in rural Haiti through an immersive exploratory app. So we're actually in the playground. Come visit us Thursday or Friday. Visit Haiti in VR. Take a tour of the schoolroom. I promise it's super fun. All right, so today's session, building a spatial lake house. I'll be honest, I don't know what that means, but I am so intrigued. But I feel like you're gonna tell me, right? So we have Ryan Smith with DGG, Dave Randle with AWS, Josh Rush with Surreal Events, and Dan O'Brien with HTC VIVE. So let's give them a giant round of applause for being here. And I will kick it over to you all.
Thank you so much. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Good, I think I hear ourselves. Perfect, well, thank you for taking time out of your busy AWE schedules to spend some time with us and learn about a mental model that we've constructed that's really helping guide enterprises into the 3D web. We're gonna get started by playing a little video to give you a teaser of some of the outcomes that this collaboration is generating. If you could hit the video. Excellent, thank you. So you may be wondering, like, that just went through a whole spew of immersive activity, right, that our customers have the pleasure of experiencing on a regular basis. And you might be wondering, what's the common thread, right? What ties all this together? And that's what we're gonna unpack today. But before we do, I'd like to introduce the esteemed panelists here. So we have Ryan Smith from DGG. Josh Rush in the middle from Surreal Events. And Dan O'Brien from HTC VIVE. Perfect, and I'm David Randle. I lead the spatial computing go-to-market team at AWS, Amazon Web Services. Thank you. Probably before we start, you just met everyone, I'll explain this. Because without knowing this, what we're gonna talk about is gonna be a little bit irrelevant. And so, this has taken the better part of kind of 3 years to formulate, if anyone's wondering. And we at AWS have kind of a unique pleasure to work with companies that range all the way from the largest, most complex organizations to the smallest, fastest moving organizations. And over this chapter of 3 or so years, we've been able to understand the nuances about what it takes to move immersive experiences from POCs or small-scale projects into scale, right, to reach thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users. And there's a common thread here that is really the enabler, right? And the leading companies that are starting to take advantage of this mental model are the ones that are able to bridge that gap, right, and cross the chasm, going from small-scale deployments to really affecting the way they evolve and change their business into a more visual way of working. And so what we're going to do today is break this down, and this isn't just about us, right? The only way this works is with partnerships and innovators in the space that are really operating at 3 key levels in the middle here, right? So when we think about the creation and management phase, we talk about this being challenge number 1 that we've observed across business profiles, right? Both the large companies and the startups. Creating spatial data, which we define as 3D models, IoT data feeds, location data, and other types of digital twins, for example, together, is hard to create for most, especially non-3D heavy industries, like meaning companies that haven't been using 3D across their organization, but also ones that are emerging as 3D users, right? So creation of this data is difficult. And then managing that data is difficult if they're already creating it, in the case of automotive, aerospace, heavy manufacturing organizations. And so there's a lot of trapped potential within this content that exists within enterprises, right? And what we're doing here is helping them unlock that potential to create much more value across their whole business, right? Connecting multiple lines of businesses to benefit. So that's kind of step number 1, right? And so we need to initiate what we call the immersive flywheel spinning at the center here by creating and managing, or helping our customers create and manage their spatial data. The second step is to create value on top of that data, right? So once it's freed, so to speak, what does that allow a company to do? Right? It allows them to ingest that and spit it back out in terms of a value equation for their users, whether it's internal users that are doing training or collaboration or virtual try-on or persistent virtual worlds for collaboration, you name it, right? All of that creates value around this data, and so customers need help orchestrating that, largely because the ecosystem's quite complex, right? So simplifying that and picking the right path for the right outcome is pretty important. And then lastly, it's the deliver and interact phase. And so once you take these pixels that are being created in the cloud, typically in real time, getting that to users wherever they are on any device to deliver that experience becomes critical, right? That's the last mile, so to speak, of getting the actual experience to an end user, whether it's on wearables, AR, VR, whether it's on tablets or web browsers, doesn't matter, right? But getting those immersive experiences directly to the end users is the last mile of that delivery. And what we see happening here, by the way, no one's perfected this, right? So if you're like, wow, we haven't even started, or this looks super complex for us to do, you're not alone, right? The most advanced organizations are just starting their journey into this world. But what we're seeing happen early on is that they're initiating this demand for more data, which allows them to create more experiences, which enables them to reach more users, which drives more demand for content, and so on and so forth. Right, so we are seeing this immersive flywheel start to take shape within the most impactful customers that we get to service. It's a beautiful thing to witness, right? And this has been one of those things that we've been hoping for, and not just hoping, right? We've all been working very hard behind the scenes to make this happen on behalf of our customers, but it's happening. The beautiful thing about this is once this operates, it starts to free connections between almost every line of business in an organization. And that, by the way, is what's probably hindered the success of immersive experiences historically. It's the fact that these things have been siloed. They've been pretty much provisioned by innovation leaders or people that just incubate, emerging technologies, and they kind of stay there because the rest of the value is misunderstood. And so by creating the same data but serving multiple lines of business, you now have a much larger pool or much larger audience to determine the value of that data, and that's what's making a big difference here. And so we see this natural connection happening between serving these lines of business. Lastly, once this content goes from unmanaged to a managed state, as we saw happen with traditional data, by the way, there's a reason why we name this the spatial data lake. It's because it follows the methodology that most companies are now very familiar with, which is traditional data lakes using legacy data. We're talking about just modern data sources now. But going from that unmanaged to managed state makes a huge difference because not only are you generating value out of what's happening in the center here, but now you can start to apply things on the fringe, which are the lakehouse applications, let's say. Right? These are the things that connect to the data lake that add or amplify the value even more. such as automation, prediction, intelligence, largely fed by AI/ML operations, simulation, right, being able to feed simulators to figure out how to predict what's going to happen. So these are net benefits that just add and amplify the value even further. So that's what this means. A bit heavy to digest, right? But you'll hear more about this, I think, over time. But we're here to break it down. And we have representatives essentially from each of the 3 core pillars, right? So if we think about creation and management of spatial data, we have DGG, and we have some good questions and good insights that we're going to garner from them. At the build and operate, we have Josh from Surreal Events, which is one of the primary consumers of content to generate these immersive experiences. And lastly, we have HTC VIVE, who's a critical player in terms of delivering those experiences to users. Okay? We'll be here for questions afterwards as well, but without further ado, we'll kick it off and start to figure out a little bit about what's so critical about these 3 pillars. So first question, Ryan. Explain a little bit about the criticality of creation and management of 3D content in this case. You can expand on spatial data in general, but I know the specialty that you serve is around 3D data.
Yeah, you bet. One thing that hit me recently from a customer is they were out looking at how many 3D artists are there in the world. Around Earth, how many can actually build me my assets? It's about 1.2 to 1.4 million. And if you break down the number of hours that they have per year, the number of assets that people will try to create, it's just not enough. And so from the original high fidelity asset, which is job to be done number 1, to now I need that asset to perform well in VR, AR, on my website. Maybe I need it for manufacturing. There's just simply not enough cycles. And so the creation workflow is beginning to introduce a number of automations that our company does, as well as others, to unlock that labor block. How many talented people do I need just to create my assets for my given use case? So it's kind of a nice place to start, just thinking about the humans that actually have to make the art.
It's fascinating, and I mean, this idea of accessibility to 3D mediums and kind of the adoption of that content has historically been bottlenecked on people. And there's value because that intelligence and that knowledge, right, the specialty training that these folks have had has influenced where we are today. But what we're seeing is this emergent ability to start to automate a lot of that and create these pipelines for non-3D experts, right? So in fact, we term as the 3D prosumers, right? People downstream that are getting a lot of value from 3D without any 3D expertise per se.
If I can add, it's, as you were saying, with treating the whole system as a data lake means I can manage it together. Right now, these services like creation of assets are being provisioned by one team. You're in marketing, you want hero assets on your websites, just provision those. And then someone else decides, oh, I want that asset, or I'm creating assets independently for manufacturing occurring in China, my shoes. And so I'm going back and forth with a 3D asset on a workflow to verify and approve the shoes that are going to get produced. Independent parts of the company, they're not talking to each other. And the way we're moving towards is to develop one universal source asset that can then be called off of a single source, and then the derivatives of it can all be generated automatically. What's happening now, 99% of the time, is a separate artist is being called and a separate PO is being triggered for each use case. And that's simply not a managed spatial data lake by any means. That's just current labor and not knowing what to do.
I mean, and it's costly, right? There's a lot of people essentially creating the same content over and over. There's security risks,
it's
right?
About
$150
to $250 an hour, and you're going to look at 5 to 20 hours per asset if you're just talking about CPG goods. And so you can imagine very quickly how many CPG goods can I make for, say, the e-commerce use case. If you're in automotive, you've been in CAD for 40 years, and so you're probably good. But then if you go to any automotive manufacturer and look at buying a car on web, it's pretty limited today. I tried to buy a car the other day, change the interiors, and there are some 3D views, but it's all images, from an angle. There's nothing really interactive with it. For the company I looked at, anyway.
Brilliant. Moving on to the area that Josh, you and your organization plays, right, at this idea of creating value from this content. And you do it in a very creative way, right, which is not just a single data type. You're kind of ingesting a variety of different, not just data types, but a variety of different elements within a persistent virtual world. but give us a sense of kind of how important that is and why the ability to access that data is allowing you guys to create much better experiences.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to, Ryan, what you were just mentioning too, and Dave, you and I know this because we were just with a customer last week. You know, it's a large transportation company, and just trying to procure a source, you know, where is the single source of truth for 3D data? You've got marketing, you've got operations, you've actually got the manufacturing CAD data as well. And we're trying to do things, you know, in this space, you know, at speed, right? So we're trying to push this as fast as we possibly can when we think about building and operating, because it's really important for customers to be able to get things out quickly so that we can test and validate efficacy, which has really been the journey that we've been on for the last few years as we think about, you know, the M word is, you know, is this worth it, right? How do we do this in a way that is not at the cost of, you know, video game development, as we know is super expensive and timely. But we need to kind of pack all that down into a timetable that marketing can align to, and that operations, you know, can get behind without sort of dying on the vine at the office of the CTO, right? So we're stuck in this, you know, critical stage of how do we do things fast? How do we do things at a quality, right, that the biggest brands in the world would, you know, would want to do? The reason why we do all of this immersive 3D is because of the visceral nature, the hyper-realism of what can be done with real-time 3D. But we have challenges, and I think a lot of what we're getting at now, which is really interesting to see, is, you know, video game development by nature is traditionally very monolithic, so it doesn't lend itself to kind of a configure and deploy. But we're trying to work towards this model now where we've got a single source of truth, right? Where we've got 3D assets that can be configured and deployed across a multi-tenancy of different 3D experiences, right? So as you're thinking at this at an enterprise level, it's not we did a one-time deal for marketing or we did a one-time thing for operations. It's we are managing a multitude of experiences, a multi-tenancy of experiences using these types of workflows. And that's what's really exciting, I think, for us, because it does bring eventually, as we were talking about earlier, the unit economics of content creation and deployment down to a place where this can actually, you know, begin to go at scale.
Yeah, absolutely. And what about, I mean, just because we have a recent experience, right? What's happening is you're starting to get elements comprising these persistent virtual worlds that historically were kind of disparate solutions. Thinking about training and onboarding and getting people educated on a business proposition or products, right? All of that is now possible, connected in a virtual space, which means these organizations need connections back to different data sources as well, right?
That's
Not
right.
just 3D assets. So 3D assets are a problem. We've talked about why and what's changing to make that happen. But there's also this idea of how do you connect these other disparate data sources that aren't necessarily 3D, yet help contribute to this spatial experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge, but I mean, it's definitely one that I think that this approach that we're starting to solve, which again, as we start to think about bringing down the overall time to market on these things, when we've got these solutions in place, we're able to connect different technology platforms. You know, as we talk about, Dave, we've got, you know, different use cases from a single set of 3D data that are servicing HR, that are servicing marketing, servicing training, operations. And so we're starting to see this flywheel, right, which is on the screen, it just keeps spinning here. It's starting to take shape. It's like I said, it's not just a one-off, but something that becomes much more core and integral to the company's or an enterprise's overall technology platform. So, you know, all of this, again, as we start to connect these different data sets too, and the beauty of real time is that we're able to learn much faster. We're able to innovate much faster because we're able to make more sense of this data sort of at the point of consumption, which I think is one of the reasons we're really excited about where we're at right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's nice to see happening, right?
Absolutely.
Versus the theory of the past years. Excellent. So Dan, in terms of delivering and helping people interact with these experiences, what are some observations that you have in terms of what's possible with more managed access to these types of experiences and content?
Yeah, it's interesting in that, you know, when we first started with just immersive technology and virtual reality, you know, there was a lot of pain points where there was no developers to even create, you know, for this space whatsoever. It was all game development. And then looking at, you know, training and simulation has overall been the highest volume, mostly because we can measure the success from it. We have seen in the healthcare space where doctors are getting through training simulations 400% faster. Their retention is 95%. They make 6 times fewer errors in the operating room. So we're seeing like real data and results of the benefits of it. I think we've spent the last couple of years now in that last mile looking at, okay, what is the infrastructure to actually now deliver this? So we build things like Viveverse Business, where it is a internal metaverse just for a corporate entity or a business entity to actually have it all inside. That you have to work on the privacy, the security, make sure all of that is safe for that corporate environment to be able to use those things, be able to test the hardware and deploy the hardware. These are a lot of the pain points that we've had to work through in the last couple of years. These things are all being solved now. The other main pain point that we're also seeing, which is very relevant to this whole operating model, is that the delivery over time and the speed of the delivery of the content and the access to the data infrastructure to be able to actually consume the content. So we've been developing private 5G networks. We actually have the ability to hook up hundreds of headsets in a 1,000-meter square area, have collaborative experiences, whether it's training, whether it's simulation, whether it's soft skills training, whether it's interactive design, but actually having a cloud infrastructure that's connected to an AWS infrastructure. Now you're actually looking at scale, deployment, privacy, security, all those things coming into concert together. So we look at it and go, that last mile is very intricate. It's very challenging to solve for, but it's actually being solved for now. We actually have customers deploying 5G networks, having headsets streaming content directly to them instead of having it resident on the headset. This is going to allow us to get to lighter headsets. This is going to allow us to get to lighter wearables and easier for people to use, whether they're using it in a professional environment in an office or they're using it in their home environment. So we're working on all kinds of solutions where it's no longer even an all-in-one headset. It is just a wearable glasses. And then these things are all connected, just as you were saying. It doesn't even have to be a wearable or a headset. It's connected to your iPad. It's connected to your PC or your phone. And so like that last mile and making that all seamless across is something that we've been working on for the last several years. And I think a lot of people look at HTC VIVE and just see like a VR headset, but we were the first ones to invent 4G LTE devices. And we were the first ones to invent a 5G connected immersive headset as well. And so this is the kind of stuff that we love to solve for, and which actually allows that hyperscaling of this technology.
I mean, one observation that's not obvious too, and you just started alluding to this a little bit, is the ecosystem of, let's call it features or services around the delivery and interaction with immersive experiences as well. So although it might be mistaken for a VR headset company, right? The fact that you've invested in the networking component, the device management component, the out-of-the-box experiences that somebody can just get access to without having to traverse the rest, right? All of that becomes super valuable, but that consolidation's only really started happening. But it really helps, right, with that third pillar.
For sure, for sure. I think it's, thinking about just that out-of-box experience too, if you're in an immersive environment, like our headset, the XR Elite, you put that headset on, it automatically creates a safe space for the user to immediately start using it inside of that corporate environment. So like we've designed it so that it's very simple for the an enterprise or a business user or a professional use case user to actually apply it, and then bringing it into their home environment, making that much easier for those users. So I also think too, the headsets of the future are, they're mixed reality headsets. They're augmented, they're going to be doing augmented experiences, virtual experiences, mixed reality experiences. So you're going to see a multitude of the different types of assets, the different types of solutions that are going to have to be delivered in this lighter footprint. So from us, we look at it and go, it's a pretty amazing setup of panelists and like how we're actually all contributing to that model.
Yeah, I mean, this is, again, we were with a customer a couple months ago, and we were talking about, a metaverse deployment and sort of where VR or XR played a role in this, and it was because of training, right? I mean, like you said, the efficacy of training in VR has been proven, but it's not the thing that has been, as hyped as some of the other new technologies the last couple of years. But as this customer said, look, we've invested in VR for the last 10 years. There hasn't been a lot of leaps and bounds improvements, but as we're starting to think about where things can, building these edge networks, streaming content, right, from a singular source, now you're getting a sort of lowest common denominator is a very high fidelity very immersive, sort of a one port of call for all experiences across the organization. And that's where we're seeing, from a customer perspective, a lot of real excitement. Because it's sort of bringing forward to the now, right, not the future, the promise of what we've all been sort of working towards, which is this is not theoretical. This is something that we're starting to actually implement now, sort of a device agnostic, super high fidelity, immersive experiences across an organization.
So, on this journey, we've all had the pleasure on kind of being on together, and the individual opportunities that you serve. What are some thoughts throughout these regular interactions that come up as challenges that the market kind of echoes? Because there still are existing challenges, right? I mean, this starts to help frame a reason why people need a more consolidated approach and a bit more structure. But there's still stuff like, there's still hazards, let's say, along the way.
If only there was a virtual asset management platform. Honestly, we've had so many conversations with enterprise partners saying, hey, this is great. I've got this image optimization service I use and video optimization, or 3D optimization, cool. Can you embed that in my existing DAM? And we're like, oh my God, our team is going to freak out if we add that spec to this license as well. Can we actually go into the DAM space? Hells no. We need components. Hey, what about like all the content and how's it going to be managed and all my IPs in there, so I can't make my IP available? Security, access controls, et cetera. Major issue for one of the largest brands we work with, where the laces have IP in them with the textures and materials. That can't just be available. So it's got to be baked down or in a controlled environment for people to approve it before that asset goes into production. And so all the ands that emerge when working out a solution immediately get you down to how can I pull this data lake together? What are the solutions that all fit? And for us, many of the creation and workflows get really overwhelming really fast. We can only pull off so much, and so then we have to be able to figure out how to bundle to actually form a solution.
So this idea of rapid scope creep, once people get a taste of getting over one of these hurdles, now how do they quickly get over these others?
An example of rapid scope creep for those artists in the room was V-Ray. V-Ray's amazing. It's been an industry standard for decades, and now more and more of those teams that have 3D assets with V-Ray materials are saying, great, I want that available on web. And then, huff, right? Oh my God, what? And so cool, some of those materials can be converted over to PBR, but some of them can't. And so now you do have to go back to your artist and reconstruct that material on that asset so it can be available on web or AR or VR. And so there is just a certain amount of training and scope creep that emerges when people get very excited. They go, awesome, yes, check, 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 let's go. And you get into the data, and you realize there's a lot of data wrangling and data cleanup and maybe some rebuild that has to happen on the data so that the use case is actually deployed.
And coming at it from the other side, right? There's, as we start to bridge this gap from smaller deployments into larger scale deployments of these experiences, one of the topics at least we hear about all the time is this concern around device management and authentication and security of content that's on devices. Are those the same things you're hearing, or what are some other challenges that you're helping the market address?
Yeah, for sure. Several of our customers, we have moved away from the POCs or even the basic pilot program of 20, 30, 50 units. We're now looking at the deployments of 5 to 100,000 units. Security, privacy, all of that is extremely important. For our company, the way we approach it to work with existing MDMs or bring them newer existing products and services that we can offer them. We have our own VIVEverse, MDM products and services that they can use. Arbor XR is one of the conference, sponsors. They're a great MDM and security deployment solution to use as well. But I think, from an overall, just looking at that deployment structure, you're going to spend probably 3 months in a security review with the IT department from Amazon or from any number of your major financial institutions. Healthcare is one of the fastest growing verticals for immersive solutions, whether it's the training or whether it's the therapeutic side or patient and distraction side. But just taking like financial services for an example, that authentication piece is extremely important. We're also looking at embedded, eye tracking so that you can authenticate with your own eyes. We are looking at all different ways that's very simple and easy for users to be able to authenticate. But you will not deploy in the hundreds of thousands of units or headsets or wearables until you actually can meet those security standards. So it's a pretty rigorous process. But we work with defense, public sector, healthcare, automotive, aerospace. Like these are all highly secure areas that you actually have to really have the infrastructure in place for, and just be prepared to go through that process. For me, I worked on smartphones before they were called smartphones. I was deploying 5,000 units, a year of Windows mobile phones with styluses and all kinds of stuff. I'm aging myself wickedly. But what I did see and how I saw things go into, Android and how open Android was and how did that work inside of a corporate and infrastructure. Like we went through a lot of the same pain points and a lot of the same review process. Windows Mobile had the lock on it or BlackBerry. Android came in and how did we solve those problems? Very similar to what we're doing here with immersive products. So it's definitely going to take off, and the problems are being solved for right now.
And do you see a kind of a similar trajectory now as
sure.
the history that you got to witness in effect?
Oh yeah, I watched smartphones go from less than 20,000 units a year to accounts that I was working on to take them to 50 million smartphones in a year. So we're right on that cusp of where that's going to go.
Exciting. Excellent. There's some also kind of these hidden challenges that some people don't really recognize. Like we talked about some of these more tactical or operational challenges, which I'm sure everyone relates to as they work either themselves or with customers. But there's things that come up a lot, which is things like a messy landscape, right? With the M word not necessarily helping things, right? Confusing customers in terms of what does that actually mean? Like what function is that serving for my business? Experiences requiring constant content creation, right? This is more like, that's why we call it the 3D web era, right? Because there's going to be constantly evolving content as these experiences mature and as audiences evolve and change. It's not like a once and done investment. Josh, can you maybe speak a little bit to, right, some of these other hidden challenges that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I think content at scale, quality content at scale is one of the bigger challenges we've faced since day one. Obviously, with procedurally generated, AI, I mean, that has the promise of potentially speeding things up quite a bit for us, where we can get more economies on content creation. It's just that has its own challenges as well as we start to look at IP. And so I think as we look at this, as I think, Ryan, you alluded to, having sort of a central DAM or virtual asset management system that will allow us to be able to kind of create libraries of content that we can then source and deploy, from a single tenancy. And I think that for us, it has traditionally been the biggest challenge because, this has been largely, the M word has been largely marketing led to date, right? And so for us, that looks like software development at the speed of a marketing campaign, which just doesn't work. It doesn't really go well, especially when you're developing in a monolithic way. It's really hard to configure and deploy and have, CI/CD work at that kind of speed where things are very intricate and they can break, as you guys know. And so for us, I think as we're looking at, how do we really get more sophistication at the asset management level, at a configure deployment level, so that as we look at sort of infrastructure, as a service, we're also looking at this content as a service so that we can be able to deploy these things with a certain degree of fidelity, brand continuity, but also control, because it's, at the heart of this is a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of energy to create this content. How can we do this in a way that gets the most mileage out of the customer's investment? And so for us, that's really where we've been focused a lot lately, and obviously having partners like yourselves that are building a lot of these solutions to help us take advantage of this, so we're paying for the compute when we need it, and not the traditional sort of data warehouse style. And I think that's going to really unlock a lot of value for us as we go forward.
Brilliant. So we're going to go into a couple rapid fire ones here to leave some time for the audience to do a Q&A. Speaking about segments, right? So we're all seeing this working a little bit, right? In some organizations, maybe at a much faster pace than others. Maybe from each of your domains, you could list a couple of examples of some people that are doing this well or starting on their journey and what that looks like for them.
Sure. So one example that's I think on our blog is working with Target. One of America's largest retailers has a very sophisticated, large-scale 3D pipeline. And so while we saw, in our own monitoring, it took about 2 years to get to 500,000 assets optimized, and then the last year we're at about 2 million, and I think this next year that's probably going to double or triple. So inside of teams, like say Target, teams are getting higher and higher volumes and more efficiencies and finding ways to go from the creation to the centralized management, and then multiple use cases. And so there are a couple teams around that have figured out how to actually pull off the HR. Like, what does the org chart look like when my business needs to look like this? This centralized asset management, multiple inflows coming in from around the world, multiple use cases coming out. And so there are teams that have configured themselves and hired to be quite 3D first. And so it's not an appendage anymore, it's actually quite integrated into the corporate strategy.
So change management is pretty critical, right? And to supplement both the technical part of this
I think
type of operating model.
it's a good case where a innovation team proved out the economics sufficiently and a number of ways to automate that displaced the prior operating model. And so that, I think, is, in a real life case, something that we look at and try to study. How did they pull that off to actually get from prototype to deployments to now just dealing with scale problems?
These are cool shoes, by the way.
Thank you.
Josh, thoughts?
I mean, we're seeing, so
You work with
there's
some amazing customers, right? So there's
Yeah, I mean, so from a B2B to C perspective, transportation, we've had the luxury of working with Celebrity Cruise Lines, Nissan, now most recently Emirates, which was just announced yesterday, or today, actually. And so and the use cases are, like I said, they're B2B, they're B2B to C. And then we're seeing high-end retail as well. We're working with one of the world's largest, beauty brands. And all of them have been leaning into this hypothesis, which is that there's this white space that exists between the time that somebody will interact with your brand online and the point at which they're going to make some sort of an informed purchasing decision or, a conversion, if you will. And we, over the last couple of years, have been able to prove out with many of our customers that white space exists in this immersive spatial, reality, which is, to say we'll get folks that'll lean in for, on average, 20, 30 minutes when the engagement's right, when the content's right, when it's well-produced, well-positioned, and well-promoted. That white space is meaningful when you think about traditional digital marketing campaigns. And so those two, I guess, segments, if you will, between transportation, which is automotive or sort of recreational, kind of vehicle or travel, and then high-end retail. I mean, that's where we're seeing sort of a real pull-through effect on our business and how we're developing.
brilliant. Dan, thoughts?
Gosh,
What's your observation?
we are so embedded. We have 5 verticals that we really focus on right now. Healthcare being the biggest and fastest growing. Automotive and aerospace, public sector, engineering, construction, AEC, construction and engineering, and then education. And so, we see in these verticals, I mean, on the healthcare side, you have Penumbra is out doing therapeutics with stroke rehabilitation, doing a phenomenal job. XR Health is doing mental health. We have Mind VR working with thousands of senior care facilities. So we work with every automotive partner, from Ford to GM to Toyota, from everything from engineering and design and to actually soft skills, training as well. So we're seeing it in a wide variety. Axon is one of our strategic partners, and they're using it to teach police officers how to de-escalate high-stress scenarios and how to not have fatal interactions between the general citizens and officers. And they're finding tremendous success to train your biology to have a different response. Wide Awake VR is one of our dental partners, and they're using distraction therapy to lessen the need for anesthesia. So now you can actually get through an oral surgery without any anesthesia or very little. So now your patient recovery time and the outcome for the patient is significantly higher. So just overall, like, we're seeing some really, really interesting spaces. We can't announce it yet, but we're seeing some really, really amazing, that was very Trumpy. Yeah, no, but we are seeing some really interesting growth in the financial services space. And I think we're going to see some really fun announcements in that space in the coming year, where some really, really big brands are saying, okay, how can we now bring this in and deploy this in the hundreds of thousands of units for our employees?
I mean, as are we in that regard, right? That's been kind of one of those surprise categories.
Yeah.
It's like, what on earth could these organizations be doing to get value out of a 3D thread, right? How are they telling these stories for their employees? But it's happening. And I think the ones that don't have the baggage of dealing with legacy 3D processes, let's say, the automotive aerospace companies, maybe have a bit of an advantage here, right? They're maybe a little bit more open to understanding and moving towards this operating model than some of the ones that have to have these kind of features, let's say, to connect back to legacy systems and kind of an older way of working. So.
Well, it comes down to like kinesthetic learning styles. We're all different human beings in how we learn, but kinesthetic learning is like 99% of humans learn kinesthetically with our hands, our eyes, our ears, our senses. And so with that, we see retention rates at 95%, for a training simulation, and 400% faster through that training. We're at 15% for, I think, reading and 5% for lecture. So I'm really engaging, I think, but you're only going to remember about 5% of what I say. But just in general, I think, and it's not just about the retention, it's actual recall and then application, right? And so the confidence level of the users that do this type of learning style is significantly higher, so you have a better outcome for your customers. We've also seen where customer service reps, we're seeing higher customer service levels just from training the customer service reps more effectively. No different in the training, no different materials, just better performing customer service reps.
So, I mean, this is firsthand experience, right, Josh, for us as well?
Absolutely.
So, yeah, there's no doubt that the hospitality world, right? People that care about that level of service as a differentiator can start to leverage these virtual environments to practice, as long as, right, they can produce that content with a good ROI. So what, speaking about organizations that are doing fun stuff, are these organizations doubling down? Are they retrenching? Are they all pivoting towards generative AI? Did that take the limelight from us? Like, what's actually happening?
One hot thing right now is just recession-proofing businesses, going through layoffs, consolidating, and then letting off a lot of teams. And so up until last summer, I was with Shopify. I was the media lead for Shopify. I ran the image, video, and 3D work. And there was a decision at that point to remove that whole team. It took years to build, and just, in a swoosh, it was gone. And that's happening as I look around at my colleagues and the people that, I've been building AI 3D for the last 10 years, like, they're all displaced. Fortunately, one of the teams I got to meet at Shopify and we licensed the technology was DJG. So I built a relationship with the founder, licensed their technology, and then when I needed help, they were one of the teams I called. And so there's this diaspora of talent going around right now, and in some companies, they're taking that as an advantage. And so they're picking up talent and then going after opportunities, and some of the largest brands in e-com are actually doubling down in 3D and AR right now. It's an opportunity for them, if they've got a little extra cash on the balance sheet, to pick up some of that talent they've been talking about, while consolidating another division, and then looking what the next 2, 3, 4 years are going to look like on their balance sheet. And on the balance sheet, it's conversion rate, average order value, return rate. Like, there's a couple obvious KPI that this technology set solve for. And there's been enough years of other case studies that you can just point and see, yes, if I make this bet's going to work out. And when you have a recession environment, you want to make a couple of really good bets.
Yeah, I think one of those bets we're seeing is on people, right? How do you optimize the workforce that you have and create just a better experience for them, more capability for them, more exciting future as well? I think that speaks to some of the experience you've had as well. I think that's why companies like Emirates, for example, are investing in the areas that they are.
Yeah, I mean, so we've had the benefit of time and sort of riding this wave of, meta announcements from, I guess, a year and a half ago to sort of the trough now of disillusionment with the inward, is giving us a chance to really kind of survey the landscape where it's not as noisy. And what we're seeing are really, substantive use cases where this sort of mindset, this mental model exists. We don't have to convince the customer that this is where we should be going. They're actually looking at this as not just a one-off POC. It's now, okay, we see the value and the efficacy of this as a model. We know it's early, but we're going to lean in for the next 3, 5, 7 years because we can't not start now, and we can't make the mistake of waiting for this stuff to happen. So. Yeah, for us, it's been great because we're seeing that companies that value innovation for the sake of innovation are there, but it's not just a test run. It is really building for the future.
Perfect. So lastly, before we go to Q&A here, what's on the horizon? What are some predictions? And you can't say generative AI.
You want to go?
And whoever goes first.
All right. I think we're at a really interesting time economically. To kind of lean in on the recession side of things. Dating myself a little bit, this is my second one during my major working career. And this is like a really opportune time to actually take advantage. You have the talent pools not being completely pulled away by Meta, Amazon, and Microsoft and all the others, right? And you have you're seeing the evolution of the most number of startups in the history of the world, or in the history of the US. You're seeing the combination of 5G, edge computing network structures. You're seeing the combination of now mixed reality headsets, lighter, more ergonomic wearables. The technology will get less expensive. Now you see these startup teams that were in the past needed to be 5 to 15 to 20 people for a startup to do this. Now you can do it with 3 with generative AI.
Couldn't avoid it.
I couldn't. But I do think that, these times, not only in the combination of the technology, but in the combination of the economic cycle. This is a really critical time where a ton of innovation is actually going to occur because these startups are actually off, working on their own. They're being extremely innovative. They're not stuck inside of a big corporate entity that's maybe going to restrict them from actually taking advantage of all the different technologies and the access to it. And I do think that we're going to see a lot of movement over the next 2 years in connectivity. We're going to see a massive move in the headsets and the last mile, and it's going to become much more accessible.
Perfect. I think we have to leave just a minute for some questions here, but huge thank you, Ryan, Josh, Dan. Really insightful conversation. Thank you for the audience as well. How much time do they have for QA?
Yeah, I think we have at least 5 minutes.
Perfect.
Maybe 5 to 7. So please feel free to grab the mic and
Hit us.
if you have any questions.
Oh.
And if no one has questions, we can talk about more predictions.
One prediction I'll throw out is from lockdown that dispersed a lot of talent, especially from the Bay Area. We're seeing some interesting patterns, like New York just published in Manhattan, there are more Series Seed and Series A startups than there are in the Bay Area as of this year. That's a major turning point for tech, right? New Yorker out there.
Yeah.
And it does change the point of view. There is a Valley point of view and there's a New York point of view, and it's interesting. It's cool that there's that diversity now. There's 2 nodes in America.
Good question.
Thanks. Michael Robbins from Learning Pathmakers in Washington, D.C. You talked about data privacy and security, certainly from a business intelligence perspective, that's important. But I look at this diagram and I think about this issue, this broader issue of data dignity, right? Individual ownership of data. Where do you see that in the mix right now with data and spatial, with things like solid pods and edge computing?
You guys want me to take it?
Go for it.
Privacy and security for end users, consumers versus an enterprise or a company, for our brand and our company is extremely important. We go as far as encrypting the content that's in the cameras that's in the wearable, so that no platform or nor developer can actually access anything that is in the room that you might be doing whatever that experience is. So we take, we do not have a business model to monetize your user data, so we don't see a need for it. Like, we have eye tracking, facial tracking built into our products, but that is to optimize the lens. It's to optimize the virtual experience of you interacting in that space, but it's also to optimize that we only have to show what your pupil is looking at and have that optimized on the display. And then if I offload all of that digital content to just what you're looking at, I get to benefit the 5G connectivity network. And so I get to make it all work more smoothly at high fidelity and better performance. So it's about the user actually getting the better performance from that technology and not me using the technology to take your data. Does that make sense?
I'll add a little bit of that too. I mean, what might not be obvious here is one of the principles that AWS applies, right, in any account, which is the shared responsibility model. And so it's our duty to make sure that the tools exist for a customer to protect their data, their users' data, their privacy, to the standard that they determine is required, right, for their business and their owners as well. And so there's not an idea of pushing a certain agenda. There's not a certain idea of sharing data, right, to benefit us as an organization or elsewhere. And so maybe one of the things we need to do is put a little security logo on the outer ring here that helps encompass the fact that, right, this is part of the value that you get out of this, but that shared responsibility model very much supports our customers to do what they need to do. Any other questions? Josh, prediction?
Yeah, I think we're following some really, really fascinating advancements in the way that pixels are streamed right now. I think because we're a stream platform, the challenge is obviously infrastructure and then GPU, but a lot of the way that pixels are moved today are really the same as they've been for the last 30 years. And so there are definitely some room for advancements there, and we're watching and tracking some really interesting technology, as well as multi-tenancy of the GPU. And this is not your traditional kind of splicing, but this is more kind of re-engineering at operating system level, so that we can get more scale on the GPU, so more of these high fidelity experiences can be consumed than we're currently available to serve. So for us, I think in the next 2 or 3 years, I think we're going to see a lot more of that, as well as obviously the infrastructure to support it, both traditionally and at the edge.
I mean, I'm glad you brought this up, right? Because we didn't cover this in part of the challenges, but this is one of the more obvious challenges, which is as you move these workloads to the cloud, the historic model of kind of one instance to a user just doesn't scale. And so one of those other big reasons why moving into this kind of operating model works is because of economies of scale and starting to break or separate this idea of adding more users without adding equal amount of infrastructure. And I think what Josh just touched on is exactly one of those types of advancements. That's, I agree, right? There's some very interesting things happening in the background that really help organizations start to adopt these experiences at scale.
And, not to beat up on the Wi-Fi, alliance, but to your other question about security, if you want to know how to keep your end user security, safe in a consumer versus an enterprise, if you're going over a 5G or a 6G network, in 2030, we'll all be talking about 6G networks. But, this is a much more secure method for actually sending across this data. Just by network design, it's actually nearly impenetrable to actually steal that data.
Brilliant. On that note, another huge thank you to the panelists here, and thank you to the audience for joining us. We're all available, sprinkled around the floor, so if anything comes up, you know how to find us. Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Perfect.